All right, here we go. Welcome to T, the Transgender Experience in Arkansas, a series of conversations with an array of transgender guests. T is filmed in the Listening Lab in the studios of KUAF National Public Radio in Fayetteville. I'm your host, Taylor Johnson. Our trans guest today is Ethan Avanzino. He's a resident of Eureka Springs. He's married to David Avanzino, who serves on the city council. The couple operates a tourist accommodation in Eureka. Ethan also works for a Fortune 500 airline. Ethan, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
Oh, yeah, I'm fantastic.
Good.
Are you ready for some questions?
I'm here for it.
Awesome. So, Ethan, you came out in late 2015 at 26-year-old as a transgender man on YouTube, a very public event for you. In the video, you say when you were 4 in the early 1990s, you told your mom that you wanted to be a boy. What was that experience like for you?
So growing up, I always felt like I was different, and we didn't really have the language of being trans or gender nonconforming, in the late 80s and early 90s. And so the best way I knew how to communicate to my mom was asking her if I could be a boy. And of course, at the time, not knowing what trans was, my mom was like, well, no. But my mom raised me in a way that worked for everybody. I wanted to play sports with the boys, so I was able to play on the boys' football team and baseball team. I wanted to wear boys' clothes, so my mom let me do that, boys' tennis shoes. It was the little things that mattered to me, and she was okay with that. I'm sure she had some really awkward conversations amongst her mom friends about what was going on with her, air quotes, little girl. But my mom was very affirming of me growing up. And I think I'm really fortunate in that aspect. She didn't know that she was doing the right thing, but she was doing the right thing.
So you could say that your early transition was pretty social, a social transition.
100%. Yeah. It was physical in the, I'm sorry, let me go back. It was a change of clothing. It was styling my hair a certain way. It was the people that I interacted with, the teams, the sports teams that I played on. That was my transition, quote unquote, as a kid. Of course, I didn't change my legal name or the name that people called me. My birth certificate still said female. People still referred to me as a girl. The term that was most common back then was a tomboy, because that was the best we could get at the time.
So what was your childhood like?
So growing up, I want to say I was a pretty happy kid. There were certainly awkward moments. I always felt like I didn't quite fit in with anybody, but I did have majority male friends, and I wasn't bullied, which I feel really fortunate for. The guys that I was friends with, I feel like they saw me as one of their own. I remember in 5th grade, my best friend had a birthday party, and my mom and I went to go, knock on the door to go into the birthday party, and all these boys from my 5th grade class open up the door and, oh, you invited a girl to this party? And the rest of the guys were like, no, man, she's cool. She's one of us. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And so there I was, the only quote-unquote girl at this all-boy party. And that, I think, is the best summary of my childhood.
Was that a really validating experience for you?
It was and it wasn't. So, not really knowing that I was trans at the time, they were just identifying me as being a cool girl, right? So they were just recognizing that I fit in with them, and there was nothing really different about me that would make me stand out amongst that group. And again, not having terms like trans, I felt loved and I felt welcomed. I wouldn't necessarily say that I felt like they saw me or referred to me as a man, because they didn't. But they saw me as who I was, and that was one of their friends that just happened to, at the time, use she, her pronouns and be referred to as a girl.
You continued to live in the shadows as a trans youth up until college, when you first discovered transgender culture. Instead of embracing your identity, you remain closeted up until trans celebrity Olympic gold medal winner Bruce Jenner came out as Caitlyn Jenner in 2015. What was it about Caitlyn that made you feel free enough to express your trans identity for the very first time in that very public way on YouTube?
So Caitlyn Jenner had her interview that was broadcasted nationally, and both my mom and my sister separately texted me saying, I would love to talk to you about the Caitlyn Jenner interview. And I thought, oh my God, they know I'm trans. So I called my sister and I said, I got your text, and yes, I'm transgender. And my sister responded, oh, I was not calling about that. I just wanted to hear what you had to say about the interview with Caitlyn. Okay. I'm not surprised. I'm a little bit shocked, but not surprised at all. And my sister actually said, I've always felt like I've had an older brother and a sister with you. And my sister has been supportive ever since. So I hung up the phone with my sister, and I thought, well, now my sister knows, and she's not going to keep that from my mom. So I called my mom, and I was like, well, I wasn't planning on having this conversation like this, but I just told Sam, my sister, but I'm trans, and I don't really know what that means right now, but I'm kind of working through what that means. So Caitlyn's story and my story kind of happened on accident, but once I knew that I was out to my mom and sister, there really wasn't any going back. It was just a matter of figuring out the roadmap to eventually coming out on YouTube.
Describe how it felt coming out so publicly. Were you scared? Were you validated? Were you happy? What was the dominant feeling?
So I made a video to post on YouTube selfishly because I didn't want to continue answering the same questions over and over again from friends, family, and coworkers. Truly, that was the only reason why I made it, thinking that I was just going to have to save myself having the conversation with 10 to 20 people. I didn't realize that the video that I made coming out as Ethan was going to be what it became. It was really just supposed to be a shortcut for me to not have to have an awkward conversation 20 times. And next thing I know, it's being shared amongst my friends, being shared amongst colleagues. I've had a couple universities reach out to me asking if they could use my coming out video in some of their gender and sexuality courses. But I just have to laugh thinking, I just made this video just for my own reasons for not wanting to have a conversation with people over and over again.
Since then, you've been an outspoken advocate for transgender civil rights, testifying against bias bills sponsored by right-wing lawmakers in several states, including our own Arkansas, that aim to erase trans culture. More bias laws are enacted with each passing year. Why do you think this is happening, in your opinion? Why are trans folk in particular being targeted, especially at this point in history, in this current day?
So I think the anti-trans legislation is directly tied to the visibility of transgender people. The more visibility that trans folks get in the media, the more people are able to be connected via social media, the more anti-trans bills there are. And I think people that are writing these bills are afraid of what they don't know. And if they don't know anybody that's trans, then that's why they're writing these bills. I think we're at this, they call it the trans tipping point, and we can't go back in the closet. We are here and we exist. And so it is a matter of, in my opinion, the people who feel compelled to write these bills to get to know someone who is trans. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of trans people that are out and visible, and I don't blame them because it's not really a safe environment for them to be out. But the more folks that can be out, the more folks that feel comfortable reaching across party lines, if you will, and entering spaces that they may not feel completely safe in order to have those conversations, I think the more hearts and minds can be opened. And if you look at the progression of the trans rights movement, it follows all of the other social justice movements. and it just takes the folks who are targeted to be visible, to get to know the folks who are against them, to really break down those walls, and to progress as a whole. But it's going to take those conversations. It's not going to be done overnight. It's not going to be done in the next year. This is a long-term game, and we have to be prepared to be in it.
Do you think the burden of educating the masses or people that don't agree with trans folk exists with trans folk or LGBT people?
I think it's a complicated answer. I will say that there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into the education around LGBTQ topics. I think there are people who are prepared to take on that emotional labor, and there are people who are not. And there is an aspect of privilege that has to be acknowledged and addressed when we talk about education. There are trans folks who are out there who are fighting for their lives every day. And what comes to mind for me specifically is trans women of color. Every day is a fight for them. And I don't think it's right for them to have to be the ones to pull or carry that emotional labor of educating. You look at people who have privilege, and I'll say that is me. I am white. I am male presenting. I do not fear for my life when I go into the grocery store. And I feel like the best way that I can use my privilege is to carry that emotional labor, because I'm not having to worry about every other thing, every other aspect of my life. So is it on trans people to do the education? Yes and no. It's really an individual choice on who is able to and who is not based upon their circumstances.
You host workshops in various venues called Trans 101. What is the reason for teaching the course? What does that cover?
Yeah, so I started teaching Trans 101 when it was asked of me to put together a presentation because people didn't understand what it meant to be trans. And the topics that we cover are gender, sex, and sexuality. And I first start by having my learners identify their sex, their gender, and their sexuality, because there's no use in having someone try to learn about somebody else if they don't quite understand themselves. So once we get through breaking down what those terms mean for them, then we go into what it means to be trans, what it means to be cisgender, and what different sexualities and romantic desires can mean. People can be gay, straight, they can be pansexual, they can be bisexual, they can be pan-romantic, they can be, there's all these types of things where people can be maybe attracted to one sex, but they date another sex. And it really just depends. That's when we really go into like the 201 and the 301, right? But the general 101 is what is sex, what is gender, and what is sexuality.
How useful has that been to your students coming into this class, discovering an identity that they didn't know they had, or being able to define and express it?
I think it's been relatively useful for the folks that want to attend. So when I just set up these random events, say, hey, I'm going to be hosting a Trans 101 at the library, and it's just open to whoever wants to attend. It's not like it's any official college class or anything like that. I'm not certified to teach any of this. It's just, hey, I know this information, and let me teach you. The people that attend that class, I feel like they want to do better, and they are there because they want that for themselves. They want to learn, and I'm always of the mind frame of, if I send someone to Google or send them to YouTube, I don't know what they're going to pull up when they type in those words. So I would rather be the one that gives them that information. And I think, one class is not going to cover everything that they need to know, but it's going to at least give them the framework to know what to look up when they go on Google or when they go on YouTube, or if they decide to get to know someone who's trans and have those questions and conversations, they at least have that foundation that Trans 101 brought them, instead of going into a conversation blind, or instead of going into a Google search, with no information. They at least have that framework to at least start.
You relocated to Arkansas from Dallas in 2020 with your spouse, David Avanzino, who you say took your birth name when you were wed. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So David and I got married. We had a courthouse wedding in 2018. And we had talked about last names and all of that. And we had never really settled on which direction we were going to go. It was just kind of a conversation. And so growing up as and I'll use air quotes since this is audio and not everybody's going to be able to see a video. Growing up as a little girl, I never thought that I was going to be able to give someone my last name, because back then we weren't as progressive as we are today. There wasn't really hyphenated names, and women didn't give their last names to their male partners. So I just never thought it was possible for me to give someone my last name. And so it was about a month after our little courthouse ceremony, David came home with a sheet of paper that was folded up, and he asked me to unfold it, and so I unfolded it, and it was from the Social Security office, and he had gone down, and he had changed his last name to mine. And so I included that little blip in our official ceremony that we had during the pandemic, that this is a dream that little Ethan never thought he was going to be able to do, and that was give someone his last name. And here we are.
You can cut that out, but that was really sweet. Together, you purchased a derelict mid-modern motel in Eureka Springs, transforming it into Wonderoo Lodge and Gravel Bar. What's life like for you in Eureka Springs, Arkansas? What attracted you to the hills, the valleys, the nature of Ozarks?
We first visited Eureka Springs in the spring of 2018 for Diversity Weekend. And the first thing that caught our eye was the entire town was just covered in rainbows. And it was like, what is this? You know, it's this beautiful small town in Arkansas? Is this real? And so we continued to visit after our first initial visit, and we just fell in love. And the phrase in town is, when Eureka wants you here, she'll bring you here. And that's kind of what happened to us. And so a year and a half later, we found a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. There was a perfect price, and there's a whole backstory behind it, but nonetheless, it became ours. So that was November of 2019, and we were of the thought process that it was going to be this 5-year plan. You know, we'll figure out how to get to Arkansas in 5 years. And then March of 2020 happened, and my corporate job said, go home for 2 weeks while we figure out what this is. And I think, as we all know, 2 weeks turned into 2 months, turned into stay home forever. So we packed up all of our stuff from Dallas in March of 2020, and we said, if they call me back into the office, we'll figure it out then, but for now, we're going to go up to Eureka. And we've been there ever since. Life in Eureka is unique and quirky, and the summer season is always busy. That's our busiest time of the year. It is a beautiful town that cannot be described in words. Eureka Springs is an experience, and to use only words would be an injustice to the town itself.
You not only operate a successful tourist business in Eureka, you work as a creative producer for an airline, a company which has earned top scores 8 years in a row on Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index. What's it like to be fully accommodated, seen, heard in your professional life?
I don't have to think about my gender or sexuality on a day-to-day basis. And that may sound counterintuitive, but there is enough going on with projects and deadlines and meetings. I don't have to worry about if someone's going to misgender me or use my birth name. I can just be an employee and just work. And that is such a beautiful thing, because if I had to constantly worry about my identity while I was at work, that would be one more thing for me to have to worry about, on top of the deadline and the projects and the meetings. I will also add that come Pride Month every year, I'm usually tapped and asked, do I want to present something? And so while I'm not having to worry about my gender or sexuality outside of Pride Month, it is also nice to be celebrated during Pride Month and to be given the opportunity to educate in a corporate environment. For so long, talking about gender, sex, sexuality, religion, et cetera, politics, was frowned upon in the corporate environment. And while it's still a dance, no doubt, there is still a dance to be done in the corporate world. To be given the opportunity to educate is an incredible feeling, because I'm given a platform to open hearts and minds within this bubble that I have in corporate America.
Because you were so visible as well as socially and politically active, you've been profiled nationally on various news sites, including CNN Digital and this year by the New York Times. What have been the fruits of such publicity in your life?
The fruits of the publicity is the visibility itself. It took a visible transgender person for me to get the courage to come out myself. And so if a story about me or about what my husband and I are doing gives someone the courage to be themselves, then that is the fruit. There's a quote that I'm constantly reminded of, and it is, "We plant trees under whose shade we never plan to sit under." And that is how I feel about being a visible trans person. I may not see equality in my lifetime, but that doesn't mean that I stop working towards it, because there is going to be a little Ethan that is born today that in 20 years from now, I hope that their life is better and easier than mine is. And there was someone 20 years ago that paved the way for me to be here. So I feel like it is my responsibility to be a part of continuing to pave that path. And it's also a privilege that I hold. Like I said earlier, I don't have to worry about my day to day. And so if I can use the privilege that I have to be out, to be visible for the folks who can't be, to have those conversations, to be in those uncomfortable conversations with people who don't agree with me or who don't necessarily understand what it means to be trans, that is where I feel like I am needed. And it is so nice and so wonderful to see people that come to the lodge who have this idea, who are maybe anti-LGBTQ or who may feel a certain way about trans people. And then they sit on the porch at, Wanderoo Lodge and Gravel Bar, and they have a conversation with me or with me and David. And I can count multiple times people telling us, I thought one way before I came here, and I am leaving a changed person after talking to y'all. And so that's the fruit of being visible.
Ethan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today at KUAF. Thank you for not only sitting down and answering questions, but for the work you do and paving the way. It's definitely needed in the LGBT community. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course.